So, as we mentioned in our previous video covering the meta raw lances, Lance is interesting because elemental and status are also both very viable for optimal damage. But how strong are they compared to raw lances? Well, I'm JinJinx.
And I'm Tuna. And we're
the Monster Hunter math guys. And this is Monster Hunter World Iceborne meta status lance builds. Now, when we're talking about damage status, we are specifically talking about both poison and blast. We do have videos covering exactly how statuses work and how we calculate how effective the damage is on these statuses. Now, we aren't going to bother re-explaining any of these concepts in this video, so if you don't already know how that works, link in the top right and the description to those videos. We'll also be talking about Paralysis Lances because they're actually pretty good on Lance. Now, personally, I don't really consider Lance a weapon that needs paralysis because between the ability to block, the ability to animation cancel into guard point mechanics, and also the clutch claw counter, you don't really have a difficulty with uptime on the Lance. But specifically for paralysis weak matchups like Diablos and Odogaron, it can be very handy to have paralysis. Diablos in particular can add about 10 extra minutes to a run just because he felt like digging constantly. Alright, there are a lot of builds to go through, so before that, just a real quick reminder. We do have a Twitter where we post updates about videos as well as general things that interest us, and Tuna does stream live on Twitch almost every single day. Alright, we have a lot of builds to go through, so let's start firing through them. We'll start with Poison. Poison is particularly nice because there is only one strong option for Poison, the Garuga Lance. Now, the Garuga Lance with a full damage loadout like right here hits 788.13 EFR. This is only 2.81 EFR lower than the Runa no Gigante Lance. This EFR difference is so low, a single poison proc on any monster will cover the damage between this and the Runa no Gigante Lance. Now, the Runa no Gigante Lance does get dragon damage, which depending on hit zone value on a 3-star monster is around a 3 to 5% damage increase. Which means on a 3-star weak to poison monster, you would need 2 poison procs, and then on a 2-star, you would need 3 poison procs. Assuming roughly a 4% increase in damage from the dragon output, it is entirely dependent on hit zone value ratios. Now, I don't know how realistic the number this is to hit, because even though Lance does apply status very quickly, the Garuga Lance only has 240 poison. Either way though, against monsters that aren't weak to dragon, this should beat the Runa no Gigante every time, so why do we still recommend the Runa no Gigante as a general use lance? That's because the Garuga Lance only has 20 units of purple. The moment you hit white sharpness, you are dealing significantly less damage than the Runa no Gigante does, and you cannot make up the difference with poison. And if we compare this to the Rajang Lance, we're suddenly looking at numbers that are much more difficult to beat in terms of poison procs. We're looking at 2 to 3 for a 3-star monster, 3 to 4 for a 2-star monster, and 4 to 6 for a 1-star monster. And this doesn't even consider the thunder damage the Rajang Lance deals, which is up to a 2% damage increase if they have a high thunder hit zone value. Now, most monsters don't have a high thunder hit zone value, however most monsters have some thunder weakness, and even 1 point of thunder damage is about a 1% damage increase for Lance. Either way, assuming you can maintain the purple sharpness, the Garuga Lance is a very strong option against 3-stars and even 2-star weak to poison monsters. But that is assuming that you can maintain the 20 units of purple, and if you can, you might just be better off running the Rajang set instead anyway. We also have a Guard 5 version of the set right here. It only loses about 3% damage for running Guard 5 with Guard up, so definitely not bad. And if you want to run some quality of life skills like health boost with this, you can sub out the attack decos for health boost decos, and just make sure you sub in some extra crit eye to still hit 100% affinity. That 20 units of purple is already hard to maintain, so you want to make sure you have at least 100% affinity to keep it up. Alright, next up, let's talk about Blast. So there are quite a few Blast Lance options. Now, here's the thing, even though one of these is going to be better if you have very clean runs, Blast is interesting because just like Poison, it gets better the sloppier you play. The problem with the Garuga Lance is even though Poison as a status gets better the sloppier you play, it gets worse the sloppier you play because it only has 20 units of purple. On the other hand, Blast has options that are better as you get sloppier and better as you get cleaner. Alright, let's talk about the first Blast Lance.
You may have been expecting Ruin, but it was I, Dio. I mean, Brachydios. Jokes aside, at 691.15 EFR, the Ruiner Lance hits 14.44% higher raw damage than this set, and the Ruiner Lance includes dragon damage. But between the Blast Attack 4, the natural 480 Blast, and the 3 status augments and the 5 status customs, this hits 820 Blast. That's a lot. This is the lance to go with if you want the most explosions possible. We also throw in a defense augment on this because we have one augment slot, and there's nothing else to put in there. In order to beat the Ruiner Lance Guard 3 set in our Raw Lance video, you need 8 blasts on a 19,000 HP monster and 11 on a 25,000 HP monster. That's all assuming the monster's dragon immune. It'll take 1 additional blast per each level of dragon weakness to beat the Ruiner Lance. This is a rough guideline because the percentage damage increase from dragon damage on the Ruiner Lance has so many variables to account for. This will put us at 8 to 14 blasts to beat the Ruiner Lance, depending on the dragon weakness and the monster HP. Now, with the Apothecary Mantle, you can easily get a lot of blasts in the first 60 seconds, but as we discussed in our status guide, this is pretty deceiving. We won't rehash all of that here, we'll have a link to that video up in the top right, but just know it's difficult to get more blast procs due to scaling.
Another note about this Guard 3 set is that compared to the Rajang Lance, which is the highest damage raw lance set, it falls behind quite a bit. At 11 blasts on a 19,000 health monster and 14 blasts on a 25,000 health monster, this is a lot of blasts to achieve when you don't even consider thunder hit zone values in the equation. TLDR, this is very unlikely to beat the Rajang Lance anytime soon. Now, if you're wondering how many blasts you can get per run, we had some Lance main friends, both speedrunners and more casual hunters, do some test runs with the Brachy Lance. On T2s with 3-star weaknesses to blast, they got about 8 to 13 blasts on cleaner runs. Some runs with and some without Apothecary Mantle. Keep in mind these are at best guidelines, the amount of blasts you get will vary wildly depending on the monster's base threshold, build-up and cap numbers, as well as how clean you play. The reason we look at T2s is that tier 1s tend to have ridiculously low thresholds and base values, making them really bad examples of how many blasts you can actually get per run.
That said, on sloppier runs, they also managed to hit over 20 blasts. Blast gets better the sloppier you play, and this lance is by far the best if you play sloppy. With 40 natural units of white sharpness, 102% affinity on softened weak points, and that huge 820 blast, this is a comfy lance that gets punished a lot less for frequently whiffing softened weak points. If you want to run this in multiplayer, your best option is to drop the blast attack plus deco for flinch free. Dropping any of the offensive guard combo decals will drop your affinity below 100% affinity, which we don't recommend. If you want to maintain 100% affinity and blast attack 4 while fitting in flinch free, you'll have to drop the 2 guardian attack decos for an attack plus or swap them for a crit eye plus deco and change 2 crit eye decos to attack boost decos. Losing 2 offensive guard is a huge damage loss, but if you struggle to keep up offensive guard multiplayer, this might be the better option. We also have this guard 5 version with guard up for those of you who want even comfier runs. At 667.13 EFR, the Guard 3 set has 3.6% more raw than the Guard 5 set. We also drop a status augment for an affinity augment because we can't fit the agitator needed to hit 100% affinity. That drops us a 780 blast. Again, if you want to run flinch free, just drop the blast attack deco or the guardian attack deco. In this set, we can lose an attack deco without dropping out of 100% affinity, so it's less complicated. Compared to the Ruiner Lance Guard 5 set, this set requires 9 blasts to beat it on 19,000, and 12 blasts to beat it on 25,000. Same as before, add roughly 1 to 3 blasts per dragon weakness. 9 to 15 blasts is a lot, and not really achievable if you play cleanly. But again, the sloppier the run, the better Brachy Lance gets.
Alright, next up for blast lances, we have our recommended set, which is the Bagel Lance. At 747.26 EFR, this hits significantly higher EFR and therefore raw damage per poke compared to the Brachy Lance. In fact, this works out to about 8.1% more damage per poke compared to the Brachy Lance. But in exchange, it only gets 410 blasts, which is going to be half the blast that the Brachy Lance gets. And it only gets 20 units of purple sharpness as opposed to the Brachy Lance's natural 40 units of white. Although that being said, this set in white still deals more damage than the Brachy Lance can. Now in this case we do have a blast attack deco instead of an attack boost deco slotted in because that one extra attack boost is not guaranteed to give you an extra damage per poke. But also an extra blast attack is not guaranteed to give you an extra blast, so we go for the blast attack here, but it's entirely preference. But even without an extra attack deco in here, this is still an 8% damage increase. But how significant is this damage increase? After all, this has half the blast of the Brachy Lance. Well, this 8% damage increase makes quite a big difference. On 19,000 health monsters, you only need 4 blasts to beat the Ruiner Lance, and on 25,000 health monsters, you only need 5. This is around half of what you need on the Brachylance. Now, this does have exactly half the blast of the Brachylance, so you might think this evens out, however, you do get diminishing returns on more status. Status scales very hard the more status you apply over a hunt. Even though the Brachylance has twice the status, it's not unrealistic for you to get 50% or less extra blast compared to the Bagel Lance. For example, in the Bagel Lance footage in the background against Diablos, our friend Butz got 6 blasts. And when using the Brachylance, only got 8 blasts. Now, of course, each run's going to vary in terms of how many hits it takes to kill the monster and therefore how many blasts you get, but still, that's less than the 50% increase in blast counts. Overall, if you play more cleanly and can run with 20 units of purple, we recommend this set heavily over the Brachylance. It simply deals more damage per poke by a pretty significant degree while only getting a few less blasts per run. However, if you don't hit soften weak points frequently and you're generally poking on non-weak points, then the Brachylance will likely serve you better because you'll get more blasts out of it. Now, if you want to run this set in multiplayer, your best option is to drop the Guardian/Expert deco here, and then also sub out the Blast Attack deco for an Expert deco in order to get 100% affinity still. Now, if you want to run Guard 5 and Guard up, you have to switch up the build a little bit. Essentially, you have to drop that extra blast attack or attack boost we talked about earlier, as well as 2 Agitator in order to get both Guard 5 as well as Guard up in the set. Now, if you want to run this in multiplayer and use flinch free, you don't have that greater options, but your best choice is probably to drop a critical boost deco. If you drop anything else in this set, you drop below 100% affinity, which is not recommended, especially in multiplayer with 20 units of purple. In terms of the blast it takes for this to beat the other sets, this works out pretty much the same. It still takes 4 or 5 blasts respectively for 19,000 or 25,000 health monsters to beat the Ruiner no Gigante Lance's Guard 5 set. This actually pushes it further ahead of the Brachyllance's Guard 5 set. The Brachylance actually loses enough damage with its Guard 5 set, it requires an extra blast to beat the Guard 3 sets. So the Bagel Lances do end up being our recommended option if you play more cleanly. However, there is a distinct issue, which is that it only has 20 units of purple. So if you need more than 20 units to get through your hunts, but you don't play uncleanly enough that you want to run the full blast Brachylance set, what do? Well, it turns out the Brachylance has an alternate set that ends up being a nice middle ground. This set essentially drops all of its blast multipliers for more damage multipliers. So we ditch blast attack, throw in some more raw multiplier skills, and then we also change the augments to an attack augment, an affinity augment, a health augment, 1 element augment, and 6 attack customs. The end result is we end up with 728.11 EFR. This puts it at only 2.6% lower EFR compared to the Bagel Lance. This actually ends up being basically the same EFR we get out of the Bagel Lance running a Handicraft 4 set instead for 40 units of purple. And this has 160 more units of blast, making it better than the Bagel set with 4 Handicraft. This ends up needing about 2 more blasts per run to beat the Bagel set, meaning the Bagel set will end up beating it if you can maintain the 20 units of purple the whole hunt. 160 extra blast is nice, but it's not 2 extra blasts per run nice, assuming you play just as cleanly in both runs. But assuming you cannot maintain that 20 units of purple on the Bagel Lance, this is going to be your best middle ground option. And if you want to use this in multiplayer, just sub out the double attack boost deco here for a flinch free. We do also have a Guard 5 version of this Brachy attack set. We do have to switch to a Rajang Helmet Master's Touch setup for this because we cannot fit in both Guard Up and Guard 5 otherwise. This has the same deal as a Guard 3 set. If you want to beat the Bagel Guard 5 set, you do have to have 2 extra blasts per run. And sub out a Challenger Plus here if you want to run flinch free in multiplayer.
Finally for Blast Lance, let's touch on the last strong option, the Luna Ruin Lance. At 760.89 EFR, this hits the highest EFR out of all the Blast Lances. It's only 13.63 higher EFR than the Bagel Lance, which works out to about 2 damage per poke. And it only has 240 blast, a whole 170 less than the Bagel Guard 3. We don't bother running Blast 4 on this set, because dropping the Agitator forces us to run Crit Ice 7, which tanks the raw and the EFR on this set. At that point, the Bagel Lance gets much more EFR and blast. Besides, because this base blast is so much lower, 2 more blast attack is only 40 more blast. Not worth it. This honestly isn't a better option than the Bagel Lance. It's harder to fit in flinch free into this set, and it only gets 2 more damage per poke. And it has 48.5% the blast as Bagel. this only ever ends up needing one less blast than Basil to beat the Ruiner Gigante Lance. And with 48.5% the blast of Bagel, that's a tall order to only get one less blast. Now this Lance does get haste and recovery. That only heals you about half a regular potion every 6 pokes or so, but it's something. It's not that much weaker than Bagel Lance on clean runs, and it gets the added bonus of extra healing. So it's an option. For Guard 5, this is what you look like. Deco requirement wise, it's pretty expensive. Offensive Guard Iron Wall decos don't exist, so we have to run a Guard 5 charm. And you'll need Guardian Handicraft decos to make this one work without sacrificing a lot of skills. For flinch free, your best option is to drop a Challenger deco. Again, we recommend the Basil Lance with Guard 5 over this, but it is an option. Basil's stronger in cleaner runs and Bracky is stronger in sloppier runs. But if you like that healing from Luna Ruin, it may have some value to you. Or maybe you just like having spikes on your shield. Whatever works. Use what you want.
Alright, finally, let's talk about the Paralysis sets. Now, we don't normally cover Paralysis sets in meta set videos because the damage drop is so significant. But for Lance, that's not necessarily the case. See, the Acidic Glavenus Lance with the Paralysis Awakened is very competitive with other options. The reason for this is because Guardian release decos exist. So compared to a full damage acid Glav set, all we lose is a little bit of attack boost or agitator and non-elemental boost, and we gain paralysis out of it. On Lance, it's just very inexpensive to run free elements, at least relative to other weapon classes that have to sacrifice a lot to run free element 3. At 772.56 EFR, this is only 2.38% lower EFR than the Ruiner Gigante Lance, but it does get paralysis. That being said, it does only get 10 units of purple, which is definitely not very comfy. And frankly, Lance is one of the weapons in the game that does not really need paralysis in pretty much any situation because it can keep such high damage uptime regardless of whether a monster is attacking or moving or not. But that being said, on a lot of matchups, assuming you play cleanly enough, it is so easy to soften monster weak points as well as precisely hit specific weak points on Lance. 10 units of purple is actually a realistic amount to run. And para-weak monsters paralyze very quickly and very frequently. So at least against monsters like Odogaron as well as the Diabloses that are very weak to paralysis, this set can be very nice. Especially against the Diabloses because otherwise if you don't paralyze them, they're just constantly digging or charging. That being said, Lance is the only weapon that really gets to interact with the Diablos' charge attacks because of Clutch Claw counter. And even in White Sharpness, it still hits 733.66 EFR, which is not shabby. At the end of the day, we don't really recommend running this unless you're running it against paralysis weak monsters, but it is a pretty strong option, especially for paralysis options in Iceborne. Although that being said, in multiplayer, you have to drop a crit boost in order to run flinch free. You don't really have any better option. You also have to lose this combo deco slot for that crit boost loss. Also, if you want to run Guard 5 with Guard up, you're also lacking in good options. You basically have to ditch an offensive guard in order to run Guard up with Guard 5. This is actually the only Guard 5 set that doesn't run a Guard 5 charm. This is because in order to fit everything in here, we have to run 2 Iron Wall / release combo decos. And again, if you want to run flinch free, you have to drop a crit boost, you don't have a better option. And if you do want to maintain that offensive guard, you have to run a high rank piece of armor for a little extra slot efficiency. This does lose you 100 armor, which is going to be around an 11 to 12% increase in damage you take. This is also exclusively a solo Lance build because you can't put flinch free in here. There is no spare level 3 deco slot to work it in. You're better off just running the full master rank armor set build if you want to run flinch free.
Now, if you aren't comfortable with running only 10 units of purple and 20 units of white, the next best Paralysis Lance is the Shining Star Lance. At 726.26 EFR, this hits weaker than the Acid Glav set does in White Sharpness. But with 70 units of White Sharpness, this is significantly comfier. This Lance won't win any damage contests or speedrun times anytime soon. But again, it's super comfy, especially against para-weak monsters like Odogaron and the Diabloses. And frankly, despite being so much weaker than the Acid Glav para set, this set is still the next best Para Lance. and it is the best comfy Paralysis option.
See, pretty much every other Paralysis option requires you to run both Free Element 3 as well as a bunch of handicraft for a little bit of sharpness. They basically end up being discount versions of the Acidic Glavenus while having less damage, so if you're going to run a less comfy set, just run the Acidic Glavenus.
If you want to run flinch free, you'll have to drop the Guardian Attack Deco or the Attack Plus Deco if you're okay with running less than 100% affinity on soft and weak points. Everything else is simply more valuable. This is the Guard 5 set. We drop 20.32 EFR to run Guard 5 and Guard Up, which is pretty expensive as far as Guard 5 sets go. Not much else to say on this. If you want flinch free, drop the Challenger Plus Deco, and switch the attack augment to an affinity augment to maintain the 100% affinity.
Alright, that is all of the status Lance sets. Now, we didn't cover any sleep Lance sets because frankly there aren't really any good sleep Lance options, and sleep is a very underpowered status. While sleep does get you free wall knocks against monsters, a monster being down isn't that helpful for Lance's damage uptime. Lance is barely able to do more damage on a monster while it's down compared to just hitting it while it's moving around. But now that you have all of these meta status builds for Lance in your toolkit, you now have more options for dealing max deeps. Thank you as always for checking out the video. If you have any other friends who are interested in poking things and paralyzing, exploding, or poisoning them, be sure to share the video with them. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to let us know by liking the video and leaving a comment below. It really does help. Thank you as always to Honey over at honeyhunterworld.com for creating and maintaining the tools we use to make our sets with. And a huge thank you to our friend Butz. He is a phenomenal Lance speedrunner who not only did the background footage for this video, but also did a lot of the blast count testing we used in this video, as well as has been invaluable in discussing what does and does not work on Lance in Iceborne. Be sure to go show him some love over on his channel, link in the top right and the description. And if you'd like to come discuss Lance or just hang out in general chat, be sure to check out our Discord server, the Mathlos Nest. Just be sure to keep all Iceborne related talk to our Iceborne specific channel so our PC players can avoid spoilers. And be sure to check out our Twitter where we post updates about videos as well as things that interest us, and be sure to check out Tuno on Twitch where he streams live almost every single day. And none of this would be possible without the generosity of our patrons. And an especially big thank you to our new patrons Cody P, Javier Castillo, and Som Sang. Your support really does mean the world to us, especially when we take a little break in between videos like we did last week. So thank you so much again because it really does mean so much. And just a reminder, we still have one more video to finish off the Lance meta series with the elemental sets, but the patrons are currently voting on what the next meta series video is going to be. Every patron gets to vote on this regardless of pledge amount, so you know, wink wink. Alright, that's all we have for you on this one. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see all of our new videos as soon as they come out. Happy hunting hunters, see you on the next one. Bye!